So welcome to our Humanities Happy Hour.
Amen.
It's cold and rainy today, and today's a kid-friendly program, so I'm drinking hot tea. But I hope that you have whatever beverage makes you feel comfortable as we join Mo Reynolds to listen to some stories and learn how to tell some of our own stories.
Thanks. Take it away.
Yeah, there you go.
Awesome. It's a perfect day for cuddling up and listening to stories, right? So before I launch into the story, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. A lot of the introduction will also take place in this story, but I want to preface a little bit. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Humanities Montana. I'm new to this world of Humanities Montana, and I'm just so excited to be a part of it. I've been able to do some really wonderful workshops with high schools, and even today I did this great one with kindergartners today where I told them stories and they drew pictures as they listened to the story, and then they drew story pictures to tell me a story. It was just so wonderful, and Humanities Montana is why that's happening. So thank you so much for all you're doing, and to be here today to tell a story. So I grew up in North Carolina. We've been in Montana for about 4 years. You'll hear more about that later. We live in Eureka right now, which I love. And I've been a storyteller, I don't know, I'm 42, so I guess probably 35 years. I don't know how long I've been telling stories, but I've been maybe a professional storyteller for about 4 years or so, pursuing that. And so storytelling is something that's been around for as long as there have been campfires. People have been telling stories, or as long as they've been fishing, people have been telling stories about the fish that they caught, right? So storytelling is a really ancient art, but I've come about it in kind of a roundabout way, which I'll also tell you more about. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you learn some wonderful things about stories. I'm going to start today with the story. It's from the Menominee tribe, and that's in what we now know as Wisconsin. And they tell the story of 3 brothers who decided to go on their vision quest together. And so they decided to hike to the tallest peak in the Wisconsin area. Now, I don't know how tall the peaks get in Wisconsin. They get sort of tall here in Montana, but I don't judge anyone's vision quest. So they hiked to the top of the highest peak they could find. And the Great Spirit came down and met them there on the top of the mountain. And first he turned to the oldest brother. And he said, "You have come a very long way. What is it you desire?" And the oldest brother said, "I wish to always be able to protect my family and my friends. I wish to be the greatest warrior in the land." And the Great Spirit looked at him, and he nodded and said, "That is a noble wish. Let it be done." And then this misty fog descended, and the leaves started to swirl as the wind blew around the oldest brother. And when the leaves settled and the fog lifted, there stood the oldest brother. And his muscles were a little bit bigger, and his eyes were sharper. And the Great Spirit smiled and said, "It is done." And then he turned to the middle brother, and he said, "You have come a long way. What is it that you desire?" And the middle brother said, "I wish to always be able to provide food for my family and my friends. I wish to be the greatest hunter in the land." And the Great Spirit nodded and said, "That is a noble wish. Let it be done." And again, the wind came, and the leaves flew, and the fog descended. And when everything settled and lifted, there stood the second brother. And his eyes were also sharp, and his fingers seemed to tingle and twitch. He was ready for the hunt. And the Great Spirit smiled and said, "It is done." And then he turned to the third brother, and he said, "You have also come a long way. What is it you desire?" And the third brother looked down, and he looked up, and then he shrugged and he said, "I'm a good hunter. I'm a good warrior. I'm young, I'm strong. Really, my wish is to stay exactly as I am forever." And the Great Spirit looked at him and nodded. And then he said, that is a wish. Let it be done. And again, up came the wind, and around went the leaves, and down came the fog and the mist, and it lingered for what seemed like a little bit longer, until eventually the leaves settled, the wind ceased, and when the misty fog cleared, there stood an enormous rock. And the Great Spirit smiled and said, "It is done." About 4 years ago, my family and I were living very happily and blissfully in the mountains of Western Virginia. We lived in this old 200-year-old farmhouse tucked into this holler in the mountains. We had a stream across the road from us where my children could play, and their voices would echo off the rocks so loudly that I could sit on my front porch and hear them playing or fighting and get to them in time. We had a tiny, tiny little stream of water that trickled by our house past the old stone kitchen that housed our chickens. And then the stream went past our garden that was bursting with life. My husband had a thriving mental health, marriage, family therapy practice there in Lexington, which is this gorgeous, charming little town in southwestern Virginia. I was teaching part-time at the university just about 15 minutes away. Life was idyllic. My son had a little meat rabbit business. We were living on this farm. Everything was wonderful. And then we got a phone call. And on the phone was my husband's friend, Corey. Now, Corey had lived with my husband. They were roommates in college for just one semester. But apparently, that gave Corey the right to change the course of our lives forever. Now, Corey was living in Eureka, Montana. Now, some people, I invited some friends to watch this who are not from Montana. I know a lot of you are. But for those of you who don't know where Eureka, Montana is, if you head north, you go as far west as you can in Montana, and then you head as far north as you can, and the last bathroom you can use before crossing into Canada will be in Eureka. It's very tiny and very far north and very far west. And Corey was there running Chrysalis. It's a therapeutic boarding school for girls ages 14 to 18. And they were in need of another therapist. And so he called my husband. And my husband, because he's a good husband, said, "No thanks." He wasn't interested. And Corey said, "How about we do a phone interview? And if you like us and we like you, then we'll fly you and Morgan out. Free trip to Montana. You can look around and see what you think." My husband had a little bit of an itch to move west. His whole family is in Colorado, Washington, Utah area. My whole life was in the East. I grew up in North Carolina. My family was all in the East. I didn't have that same itch, but he did just a little bit. And I was willing to entertain it for a free trip to Montana. And so he said, "Okay, let's do it." Well, they did the phone interview. And of course they loved him because he's a wonderfully gifted therapist. And so a few weeks later, we were on the plane over Valentine's weekend heading to Eureka, Montana. Now, Montana is so beautiful. I met this man once on a plane, and I told him I was from Montana, and he said, "I don't think there could be enough calendars made to capture all the beautiful pictures of things in Montana." And I agreed. But I don't think any of those calendars would have been taken, those pictures would have been taken in February. That just isn't really Montana's time to shine. At least that was my impression when we landed in Montana. Now, I was open to this experience. I really was. But I felt like a shift of this magnitude deserved a sign, like a literal sign on the tarmac, like blinking lights saying, "The Reynolds family belongs in Montana." I didn't feel like that was too much to ask of God, if he really wanted me to move my family across the country. Well, we landed at Glacier International Airport, and there was no sign. There was just snow, and it was everywhere. And we got in the car to drive to Eureka, and my first clue that life would be a little bit different here was this really weird sound coming from the car, like as we're driving down the road. And I said to Corey, who was driving the car, "What is that sound? What's wrong with your tires?" And he said, "Nothing. Those are studded tires." Because there actually wasn't a lot of snow on the roads. It was a very mild February. Montana totally bait and switched on me because that first winter was so mild. And actually it was really kind of mild And so it was making sound on the pavement. And I was like, studded tires? And then I asked him, is that annoying? Like, you have to put on the studded tires when it snows, and then you take them off when it thaws, and then you have to put them back on, like on, off again. Is that annoying? And he looked at me and smiled and said, no, Morgan, that's cute, but that's not really how it works. They just stay on. And then I could hear the Sandlot echoing line in my head, forever, because that's how long the snow stays in Montana. That's what it felt like to me. And I thought to myself, no, I don't think so. Well, we pulled into Montana, and the drive was, of course, gorgeous, because it is so gorgeous here. We passed Sticky Lake, and we pulled into Montana. Now, I was coming from Lexington, Virginia, which is this little quaint, George Washington had been there, Robert E. Lee's, like old barns and colonial brick buildings tucked in the Appalachian Mountains and the Blue Ridge Parkway. And so I was expecting a little charming town tucked away in the Rocky Mountains. And I have to say now, whatever you might hear me say about Eureka in the next few minutes, I can only say because I have come to absolutely adore this town and the people in it. But when I first pulled into Eureka, it was the middle of February. It was dreary. I wasn't that impressed, to be totally honest. And everything was dark, right? Because we're so far north. So we went to our bed and breakfast, where we were told that they didn't really have enough business to support a breakfast. So we just started calling it the bed. And so we went to the bed, and we were in our room, and by 7 p.m. it was completely pitch black dark. And suddenly I heard the sirens. And this was not like a passing fire truck. It was like a bomb raid in London kind of siren. And I'm looking around, I look out to see if people are scurrying for cover, and nobody's there. Nobody's there. And the realtor called, and he said, hey, did you hear the siren? And I said, yes. Should I be under my bed? And he said, no, that's just what happens in Eureka every night at 7 o'clock. I hung up the phone. I turned to my husband and I said, no, no, no. And that night, God and I had a little conversation, and it went a little something like this. I said, dear God, I happen to believe that one can live a good and happy life anywhere in the world, can raise their family, can serve people, can do good things anywhere. And I think that we're on the same page on that concept. And so if this is one of those situations where you don't really care if we live in Montana or if we live in Virginia, then I just want the record to show I vote Virginia. But, I continued, I also know that you know a little bit more about what will make me happy. And so, if Montana is what is best for my family, then please help me forget everything I have seen so far and start tomorrow with a completely clean slate. But I still want to go to Virginia. Amen. And I woke up the next morning, and the miracles began. My husband went into the interview and was so impressed with Chrysalis and their team and their therapeutic model. I visited the schools where everybody knew who we were and what job we were interviewing for and how many children we had and what grades they'd be in. And they were so loving and so welcoming. And then Corey's wife, Jessica, had put together this luncheon, and there were all these ladies from Eureka sitting around so I could pepper them with every question I'd had about Eureka. And after 2 to 3 days, we felt completely at home, which was really difficult because then we flew home to Virginia and we saw our beautiful white farmhouse and the life we had built there. And that, of course, felt like home. And there we were, standing on the mountain with the wind and the fog and the leaves swirling all around us. And the Great Spirit was asking, what is it that you desire? Now, the story of how we got from point A to point B and making the decision of where to go is another story for another time. But spoiler, of course, we're in Montana. And so a few months after our interview, there we were in my driveway saying goodbye to my mother, which was the hardest part of the whole process, packed in and ready to head west. Now, we got rid of pretty much everything. I went full on like Mormon handcart pioneer. And I am a Mormon, so I know how to load a handcart, right? And so I got rid of everything that I didn't think we would absolutely need in Montana. Got rid of my Christmas dishes. I don't know why I did that. I really should have packed those. I got rid of everything. So we fit it all in one 18-foot trailer. And then we rented a U-Haul just to load the barnwood. My husband's a woodworker. So we loaded a bunch of barnwood and about 12 meat rabbits into this U-Haul truck. And then we set off like pioneers of old, heading to Montana. And it was really difficult. It was difficult for me to look in that rearview mirror and see my life that I knew and everything that was familiar fading away. And I remember at one point we were in South Dakota. Now, I don't know if anyone watching or listening is from South Dakota, and I mean no offense, but I promise that if there are calendars made about South Dakota, none of those pictures are taken from the interstate. It's not a beautiful part of your state. I think we can all agree on that. And I was driving in South Dakota, restocking by myself. We camped across the country as we went, and I was driving to the grocery store to restock, and I was just crying because I felt like I was driving off the end of the world, and everything I knew, everything I felt comfortable with was being taken away from me. And so finally we pulled into Eureka. And it was beautiful because this was the end of April and the sun came out for us, and it was rendezvous days, which was such an exciting time to be in Eureka. But the house we were going to live in wasn't available yet. So we had to stay in a cabin. Now, I think I've built up some sympathy here, right? You feel like, oh, wow, Morgan, this was really hard for you. And I don't want to lose that by you thinking, oh, you got to live by a cabin in a lake in Montana, poor thing. Because I would like to make the note that this cabin was about the size of this room. It was about 100 square feet, and I had 3 children and a dog and 12 rabbits. We had 1 car, and my husband took that car to work, and my children took the bus to school, and there I was alone in a little cabin in Montana. And so I had some time on my hands. I went hiking, and then I cleaned the house, which took 10 minutes, and then I had to sit around. And so I wanted to create something. And so I created a YouTube channel because I had stories to tell, right? I'd started storytelling kind of as a way to use my theater background, because with 3 kids and I'm pretty careful on my content, it was difficult for me to do a lot of acting. And I had this idea that I could just like act out plays or stories all by myself on a stage. I thought I had invented storytelling. I hadn't. But I started telling stories on my YouTube channel, and then we got to move into a real house, and then I got this surprise job as a librarian, and I was telling stories to kids, and I started to make friends, and life started to really feel good, to feel like, okay, this can work. Now, one of the contingencies or one of the caveats of me deciding to move to Montana, I told my husband, is I have to get at least 1 trip with just my mom every year in order for me to move to Montana, because I am very close to my mother. And so in October, after we had moved there, that was our first trip. And we decided to go to Jonesboro, Tennessee. Now, if you've never been to Jonesboro or heard of Jonesboro, it is sort of a mecca for storytelling. They have the National Storytelling Festival there and an International Storytelling Center there. If you ever get to go, I highly recommend it. And I had just discovered the fact that I had not invented storytelling, that there were lots of other people doing storytelling. And this was my first time actually seeing a professional storyteller. And I was really nervous because I thought, what if I'm not a storyteller? What if what I do isn't actually storytelling? And what if they take away my storytelling card? And what, am I supposed to have a storytelling card? Like, I was really nervous. I really thought, what if I see what she's doing and it's nothing like what I do? So I was excited, I was scared. And her name was Laura Sims. She's a wonderful storyteller. And she stood up and she told this story, and it blended folktale and narratives. And while I could tell that I had a long ways to go in storytelling, it felt familiar. And I realized, yeah, I am a storyteller. And while we were at this storytelling performance in Jonesboro, I saw a flyer for another storytelling festival that was in Florida. And so my mom and I were like, yes, here's our next trip. we're going to become storytelling groupies together. And so that was going to be in April the next year. But between October and the following April, I had to go through something called winter. And that's what I was not ready for. Because when I had come to Eureka, everyone told me, oh, it's the banana belt. It's totally mild, so much milder than the rest of Montana. It's easy, winter's really not that bad. And it hadn't been that bad on the day that we went to interview. But then it was like the worst winter in 30 years. And I woke up and it was negative 25. And I wasn't just cold. I was angry. I was angry at Montana. I was angry at all of those people that had told me it was the banana belt. I was angry that I had moved somewhere that cold. I was angry that I had to go to work when there was snow on the ground, because that doesn't happen in Virginia. I was cold. I was angry. It was dark. Literally, it was so dark. And I was stuck in Montana. And it was a hard, hard winter. But this is my 4th year in Montana, and so far, every winter has ended. And I'm hoping that trait continues. And that first winter ended, and spring came. And I've never been so excited to get on a plane in my life to go to Florida in April for that first storytelling festival. And I just dug in. I went to every workshop. I took copious notes. I threw my name in the hat for an open mic, and I got drawn. I stood up on stage, and there it was, my first real storytelling performance for an adult festival crowd. And I told the story of moving to Montana. I told the story of my meat rabbits that we had brought. And we had 2 mama rabbits. And one of them, the change was just too much. And we got there, and she just gave up. And she died a few weeks after we had gotten to Montana. And I told that story because there were times where I felt like that mama rabbit. And it was just too much. But I hadn't died. I hadn't quit. And I told the story to prove it. The 3rd brother on that mountain had wanted to stay the same forever. And he may have thought that he got that wish. But even he didn't stay the same forever. The Menominee tribe calls that rock that brother became their spirit rock. And the legend goes that as long as that rock endures, their tribe endures. But if you look up the spirit rock of the Menominee tribe and you look at pictures of it from 100 years ago, 50 years ago to today, it is getting smaller and smaller because wind happens and rains come. And even rocks change. And so if rocks change, then how can we expect to not change ourselves? And all we can do is keep moving forward, embracing the change, and hoping for the best. Thank you. So, thank you. I know it's hard to, it's really difficult to, I've been performing in some different online storytelling events, and it's always hard to know, like, in some ways, I wish everybody would just unmute, because then I could hear, like, is anybody out there? Are you reacting? You know, because it's like people shake their hands and they're applauding. But then I know that, you know, your dog's barking and other things are happening out there. So I just try to assume the best in my head and like, well, I'll just look at the pictures. Nobody looks to be sleeping. So I assume that they're listening. So what I wanted to do now is talk about how we can apply storytelling and sort of that model. So first I want to ask some questions, and I know there's a chat box, so you can either use that or you can unmute yourself and share, and we can just have kind of a conversation. But I want to ask a question of why, first of all, storytelling exists. Like, what do you think when you think of you hear the word storytelling, what comes to your mind, and why do you think it's an art that continues? Anybody to share? Good. Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah. Storytelling, to me, storytelling is all about connection, right? We connect to each other by telling stories, and we connect to ourselves, right? Good, thanks, Randy. To make sense of the world and our experiences. You know, like I told you, I had a storytelling thing this morning with kindergartners, and stories are for kids. It's interesting, as a storyteller, I've noticed that children really like folk tales and fables, and adults really like personal narratives, right? I love to blend them both, which is why we're here today. But for a child, you know, somebody can tell them to be kind and to be a good friend. And that's like, okay, that's great. What's for lunch? But if they hear a story about a chicken who made bread and none of her friends helped her, but then they all wanted the bread, then suddenly they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, in their minds, they process that, right? Stories carry kernels of truth with them. And memories, oh my gosh, yes. Memories are huge. And I could do a whole separate thing, and it's so important to dig for those family stories. We had a loss in my family this past week. My husband's father had a massive heart attack on Tuesday of last week. He was very healthy. He had just retired. He and his wife were selling their house to build a new house. It was just this prime, wonderful time of life. And he had been on the rowing machine. He was he exercised every morning, and suddenly he had an aortic aneurysm and he was gone. And we're a very close family. My husband's one of 6, and it was such a blow. And we've spent this last week, and of course, crying and sobbing and mourning, but also laughing and telling so many stories. And that's why it's so important that we tell our stories to our grandchildren and our children, that we find out our stories from aunts and uncles and cousins, that we pass on that heritage of stories is so important. To escape reality, sometimes we tell stories just because they're fun and there's no message. It's just funny, right? This happened yesterday. This is really funny. Tall tales, just funny, right? And remind us that we're not alone. When I was in a storytelling festival in Florida, there was this group, and they were doing this really remarkable work, right? They would interview someone for about 3 hours, getting their life story and some of the trauma, some of the things that they've been through. And then they would take a professional writer and condense that into about a 10-minute story. And then they had professional actors who would perform those stories. And they would have all of the people on the front row whose stories were being performed. And then they sold tickets. It was a big theater. And they would sit and watch someone performing their stories. And she said they always had therapists on hand, because it was a really powerful experience for these people to see their stories kind of held up, and for other people to experience them. And she said to me, she said, it's very difficult to hate someone when you know their story. And it's so true, because if I am looking at somebody just as an object, right? And they are an object that just interacted with me. And so they roll their eyes at me, or they turn away from me, and I see them as just an object, then all I feel towards them is resent or anger or frustration, right? But if I see them as a story, and if I understand that what I just said triggered something that had happened to them when they were younger, when they were a kid, or it happened to them 5 minutes ago, then suddenly they rolled their eyes at me. That doesn't hurt, because I know their story, and that makes sense to me. Now, stories don't excuse people. I don't let someone hurt me or abuse me because I know their story, right? Understanding someone doesn't excuse them, but it does help us understand them and move on, right? So learning each other's stories is so valuable, right? And connecting with stories is just a really powerful experience. That's why I'm a storyteller, is because I do love to entertain, and I do love funny stories and silly stories. But for me, storytelling is about building connection, right? And I've really enjoyed this process of connecting. So hopefully you have some pen and paper, okay? What we're gonna do right now is we're gonna use the chat box, okay? And I'm sorry, I know that we're Facebook Live, but you can do this at home, because I know you may not be able to see the Zoom chat box, but well, next time maybe you'll register. All right, so So what we're going to do right now is a little writing activity. Okay. Put it in the chat box there. I want you to just make a list or just type one story in, any folk tale, fairy tale, anything that comes to mind. Little Red Riding Hood, Goldilocks. Just put it in the chat box, and as you see them come up in the chat box, we'll take like the first 10 that pop up in the chat box. Make a list. Okay, so Cinderella. Great, thanks. And I will write these down. So we have Cinderella, Snow White. Good. Pinocchio. Awesome. Keep them coming. Rumpelstiltskin. I'll just write rump up there because that'll take too long. I don't all know what it means. Okay, well, you guys aren't writing the other ones. Now I have time to write Rumpelstiltskin. And there we go. Three Little Bears. Good. Ah, good. Jack and the Beanstalk. Okay. Three Little Pigs. Nice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. Any others out there? If we can get a couple more, 2 or 3 more. Folktales, good. Little Red. Awesome. Any others? Oops. Oh, good. Good. I'm glad you mentioned that one, Sam. Boy Who Cried Wolf. That's a great one. Oh, good. I'm glad someone mentioned that one. I think that one's an interesting story. Oh, Bluebeard. You know what? I need to look up that story because I don't know it. And when I did this for a high school, somebody mentioned Bluebeard. And I'm like, I know Blackbeard because that's North Carolina. That's a North Carolina pirate. But I don't know Bluebeard, so I have to look at that. It's creepy. Oh, good. I'm going to have to look that one up. Awesome. Oh, Aladdin. Cool. All right. I'll just Aladdin / the Arabian Nights, all those stories. Arabian Nights. Okay. So what I have here is my list. Okay. Now hopefully you have a list. So now you're going to do a little bit of homework. Okay. You're going to, hopefully you have this master list. You've been writing it down as well of these stories. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. And I want you to go down on this list and I want you to write down in just a couple of words what you think a main message is of this story. Okay, hopefully if there's one you don't know, like, I don't know Bluebeard, that's fine. You can skip it. But just in a couple of words, not a complete sentence. These won't be graded. But what is the main message you think of this story? So take a second. Oh, we can add Robin Hood there. All right. So take a second and just write that down. All right. So now what I'd really love to do is hear from you guys. I'm going to go kind of in the order of as you appear here on the top of my screen. And I'll just ask you to pick one of the stories. And if somebody picks yours, then have a backup ready as I come down the line. Just pick one story and share, this is what I think is the main message of it. So Sam, you want to go first?
The main message of the Three Little Pigs is to build strong houses.
Oh, nice. Cool. Did anybody else have a different, and maybe just unmute yourself and share, did anybody have a different one of what Three Little Pigs could mean?
Well, I put, be realistic about your circumstances.
Nice. Ooh, I like that. Being realistic. That's great. Thank you. Anybody else? I think Three Little Pigs, you know, I never had thought about it before. I looked it up. It was like some have used it in government, like to talk about housing, which is interesting. But I think could it also be a message about family, right? That this older brother, the second brother was willing to take in the first brother after he was foolish. And then you have this third brother that was willing to take in both brothers. And like what is the purpose of family? So that's really cool. Great. Thank you. And again, if your name that's on my screen isn't your actual name, then please tell me. I heard some whisperings about that we have two Kims or something. I don't know. So Cheryl, you're on my screen next, Cheryl Hughes. Could you tell me what one of the story was and what a message you thought?
Well, I chose Pinocchio. Can you hear me? Am I on?
Yeah. Yes, Pinocchio.
I chose Pinocchio, and interestingly enough, I just read the old Pinocchio story to my grandchildren online in the last month or so. We do a chat every day, and so I've been doing that. And you know, my message that I took away is truth's always the best.
Yeah, Yeah.
I mean,
And
it's a
and again,
terrifying tale for
it
kids.
is.
Because
It is.
Pinocchio, I didn't realize what Pinocchio actually went through. It's a pretty scary story.
Yeah. And I think there are a lot of stories like that that are grounded in these like cautionary tales for children. Like you can tell a kid, don't talk to strangers, but when you tell them a story about a little girl that talks to strangers and then that stranger eats her grandmother, and like, you know, well, then it's like, whoa, okay, I will not talk to strangers. So I think a lot of stories have that sort of like cautionary, like, don't talk to strangers, don't lie, because
I think
you know,
that
your
Pinocchio
face will
was
freeze like
created
that.
to keep kids close to home
Oh,
when there was a lot of danger out in the world. And somebody told me that it was very traditional in Italian folk tales that they took on that tone.
huh.
I don't know if that's
Interesting.
true or not, but
Wanted to keep them close in. Yeah, that's fascinating. Great. Thanks, Cheryl. Okay, MJ, what's a story that you have and a
Oh,
message?
Well, I went with Jack and the Beanstalk, and trusting your intuition. I mean, I don't know if that little boy knew he was trusting his intuition. He was kind of like just being naive, but he was tapping into an intuition that he had about those beans. And everybody, you know, his mother thought he was crazy, but and so I don't know. Maybe I'm just like putting too lofty of a spin on that little boy when he traded the cow for the beans, but I just sense that sometimes we just do things because we need to do them.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think you're being too lofty at all. And you know, those England Jack tales of Jack and the Beanstalk, they cross the ocean, and now there are a lot of Appalachian Jack tales. And a lot of those Appalachian Jack tales are this sort of, everyone thinks this simple-minded Jack, but he always inadvertently, like, you know, he has these experiences where he ends up finding this treasure, or he ends up doing this just because he kind of just does Jack. Like he's just like, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. And I think that that's a real value of these stories, of kind of seeing that when you just sort of like live honestly, or you just kind of do what feels right, there's power in that. So I don't think you're digging too deep there. I think that's a really great great part of, especially the stories like that, those Jack tales or some of those Appalachian Fool tales, where somebody isn't trying to pretend to be anything, and maybe they are a little simple, but they simply stumble into wonderful things because they just simply are who they are, even if that's simple, right? So thanks. Okay, Carla.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I took a little political spin on The Boy Who Cried Wolf and just wrote Trump.
Nice. Nice. And we'll stay politically neutral on that one, but
Difficult to do these days.
I know. And again, I think that The Boy Who Cried Wolf, like Pinocchio, like maybe Little Red Riding Hood, it could be viewed as like, hey, lying is bad, right? Here's the thing that I think is interesting about The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and this is something I want to do as a storyteller. What if the story was told, instead of saying like, where the boy is being bad by lying? What if the story, and I'm not inserting this onto your theme, but what if the story was told of what was the village doing that created a boy that felt he needed to lie to get attention? And how could we tell that story differently to think about the village, right? The story is always told from the perspective of, oh, this boy. And he did lie, and that was wrong, right? But anyway, I've just been thinking about that one, because every time I've done this, people have mentioned The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and I've thought, maybe that story has a different flavor. And that's why stories are cool, because every time you tell them, it can be a totally different story. But anyway, so I'm glad that somebody mentioned that one.
I never thought that he was lying. I just thought he was mistaken.
Okay. Awesome.
But the problem was, by raising the alarm, it was thinned out to the point where it meant nothing.
Right. Oh, he was mistaken. That's an interesting one. Because this is another cool thing about folk tales and fables, is everybody hears a different one, right? You grew up with a different version. Everybody grows up. Because I always have heard the version that he got bored. He was out in the field and he got bored and he was lonely and he was tired of being lonely, and he knew that the only way he could get the villagers to come if they thought there was a wolf. And so he just yelled wolf. And then they all came and he was like, oh, see, I was just kidding. You know, isn't that funny? You guys got all worked up and there was nothing here. And that's the version I've always heard. So, but there's no wrong.
The real wolf comes, right? The real
right.
wolf comes.
The real wolf comes and nobody believes him. But, so, yeah, well, that's cool. Thanks, Carla. Okay, Randy.
I did Bluebeard.
Oh, good. Because
it's a fairy tale about a young girl from a poor family who gets married off to this very wealthy man in a huge house, huge castle. And he says, you can go into every room and do anything in this whole house except go to this one room in the basement, which of course she goes to it. And there she finds like all of his dead wives from before. And then he discovers her there. You did the one thing I told you not to, so now it's your turn. And the message, I think, is like, women, curiosity killed the cat, so you better listen to your husbands. But there have been a lot of some feminist retellings by Angela Carter and Margaret Atwood that take it in a little bit of a different direction. That the young woman kind of had this intuition to go look in there. And it kind of, and in those stories, it kind of saves her life.
Yeah. And I've heard, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
No, I've heard of a different version, not Bluebeard, but another folk tale where the wife discovers it. And somehow, I can't remember, I read it a long time ago. I have to find this book, which if you're looking for a great book about folk tales, this is a really wonderful, if you like folk tales. It's called Favorite Folk Tales from Around the World. It's by Jane Yolen, and it's fabulous. Jane Yolen does a lot of children's books, but this is a wonderful book. And so there's a story I read in here. I can't remember how it went, but she discovered it, but then she somehow tricked him. She got her brothers to come back. And anyway, it was a different ending. So she like tricked him about it. So that's really interesting to look for. And that's what's so cool about stories. When I hear a story, like I read a story from this book. I probably can't find it, but it was like, not even, some of them are very short. Some of them are just like half a page, and I read one and it was really short and it left me with all these questions. Cause I'm like, well, how did he get the potion? And how did the dragon end up in the lake? And what about this? And so I wrote this totally different version because the original had left me with questions. And a lot of storytelling comes from asking questions, right? That's what writing is about. It's just like, what would happen if? Or you hear something and you're like, well, that's interesting, but what if we told it from a different perspective? What if, how did they get this? Why is she afraid of the dark? Why is he afraid of birds? Why? And that's that's a lot of my process in storytelling when I'm writing my own versions of stories, I ask a lot of whys, like, why is it like that? And since nobody's there to tell me, I get to write the answer and then I get to create it, right? So that's great. Thank you very much. I'm excited to look up more about that story and the Angela Carter and Margaret Atwood version. So thank you. Okay, it's all one name here, Jeanette and Friguela. I'm assuming it's maybe Jeanette.
It's Jeanette. It's just Jeanette. Okay. I had Aladdin and the 1001 Nights, and I think that of all of these, the stories of Scheherazade are about the importance of stories. And in her case, certainly, you just might save your life.
Yeah.
I just think that, that's what when I teach this text, it's what I tell my students. I said, think about, it's the importance of stories, their power to entertain, all of these kinds of things. So.
Yeah. I think that's really wonderful. Yeah, they can save your life.
They can save your life.
Yeah. And I love the story of Scheherazade because, she was telling these stories to a man that it's easy to, when you kind of flippantly kind of summarize Scheherazade, you know, this guy had killed all of his wives, and then he would like have them for one night and then kill them in the morning, and then Scheherazade came and she told him these stories and it was like a cliffhanger every night. But again, perspective, I think of it as it didn't just save her life, it saved his.
Yes.
Because she gave him children, and he was hurting. You know, he had been betrayed by his wife. He was so angry and hurt. And those stories healed him, because that's what stories do. They create.
Yeah, not just her. It's not just a story of her. It's definitely also a story.
Yeah. And that's what stories can do, right? Because, and not just storytelling, that's what music can do. That's what even sports can do. That's what, anything that you are creating, because we are creative beings. I strongly believe that humans, we just create, right? It's something that sets us apart. We just have this insatiable desire to create, and that looks like lots of different things. It can look like math, it can look like the violin, it can look like storytelling. But if that stops, if we stop creating, we die. And Scheherazade is a great story about that. And I think you just gave me my next story idea. Thank you. All right. Is this the real Kim Anderson, or is this another Kim?
This is the real Kim Anderson.
Okay.
I came up with Rumpelstiltskin, and I remember loving that story as a little girl, because to me it was about a battle of wits, and the girl won, and it stuck with me all those years.
Oh, I like that. A battle of wits, and the girl won. Nice. I really enjoy. I was in, and I don't know if Rita is watching. I know she's the one who introduced me to humanities in Montana. And for those of you, I don't know if any of you know Rita Collins here in Eureka, but when we were in a writing group, and whenever I'd bring a story, she'd be like, "That's really good, but what if you changed it to a girl instead?" Because so many folktales have boys as the hero, and it's always, you know, you want to try to stay true to a story. And I don't like remakes just to flip it, like just to have a woman to have a woman, or, you know, you want the story to feel sincere. But it's always interesting to play with that of male, female, and can you tell a story in a different way that is always traditionally a man or always traditionally a woman? Can you mix that up a little bit? And always nice when they're clever women and clever men, and they take turns. So thank you so much. Okay, Anne, can you share?
I'll pick Beauty and the Beast.
I can't not sing. Go ahead.
I think there's two things happening. One is don't judge a book by its cover.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is love heals.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And I think that although all the stories that you guys, you know, we could spend a lot of time going through this list, and every, you know, you guys may be going like, oh, I didn't even think of that one, you know, and you may have one that's totally different, and the one that you have is completely valid, right? There's so many different layers to different stories. And so, yeah, that love heals, and to not judge a book by its cover. And I think I love Beauty and the Beast. It's like my all-time favorite Disney movie. And it's a beautiful story, and there are so many stories that have that similar message, right? That you could weave together. Thanks, Anne. All right, Patricia.
I don't know which one I would put with this, but I've been thinking about Cinderella and Snow White, and the idea of innocence. It sort of fits in with naivete, and I guess I was just thinking about how encouraging that would be for a child, because as a child you feel, I mean, sort of stupid most of the time, and to see that you know, that quality of innocence reigns supreme at the end of the stories is that's what came to my mind.
That's so wonderful. I never would have thought of that. with Snow White. I think, I mean, if someone asked me, what's the message of Snow White? I'd be like, don't trust people that are giving you food. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. Or like, be happy. I don't know. But I really love that spin on it, that it's about, and I love what you said, that children need sometimes some permission to stay innocent and to keep things simple, and to take the world as it is, as what they see, until it's proven otherwise. I was listening to a podcast the other day with Kristen Bell. She's the voice of Anna, and just kind of this really positive media figure. And she was saying how she takes things until someone proves her wrong. She absolutely believes what's in front of her. So if someone is asking for money because they say their car is broken down and they're stranded at Walmart and they are asking for money, she's like, I believe that because that's all I know about them. And so I can give them money, and that makes me feel good because I'm helping this person and I believe their story. And she's like, and I find that is a happier way to live than to think, are they really broken down? How much money are they making in front of Walmart with this story? She's like, that doesn't matter to me until they prove me otherwise. I've done something nice. That makes me feel good. I assume that story's real, so I assume I'm really helping them. Kind of a Snow White-ish way of looking at the world, right? Here's this lovely old lady. She's offering me an apple. What could go wrong in this situation, right? Anyway, so thank you for that. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay, Donna. I don't want to mispronounce your last name. Maughlin? Is she still there? I don't see a camera, but so maybe she's not. She may have stepped away. Okay. Did I get everybody? I can't see if I have everyone. Is there anybody that didn't share that wants to?
I think that was everyone. There were a few people that as their names were getting closer, they hopped off.
Oh shoot, I scared them. Okay. Well, you can come back on now. She's like, I'm switching to Facebook where nobody asks me to do anything. So, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. So now what we're going to do, what I'd like you to do next is, so I have this list here, and I've made extra notes on the side. So what I would do, what we're going to go do next is, if you could, and you won't be put on the spot again, so don't worry. But what I'd like you to do is go through this list and circle a few that you feel like you know really well, right? They're like, okay, I feel really comfortable with this one. So for instance, I was super intrigued by the Scheherazade. So I know Scheherazade pretty well. And I know Three Little Bears pretty well. That's not what we talked about, but I know it pretty well. And Boy Who Cried Wolf. Like, I feel pretty confident that I know that story really well. If somebody was like, hey, tell me that story they'd never heard before, I could do a decent job of retelling it. So I've circled 3, okay? Now, this is where the heavier work comes in, right? What I want you to do is think about a story in your life, or that you've heard your mother or your father or your uncle or your cousin or a teacher or someone that's really within your personal sphere of influence, not something you heard on TV or something like that, but a story from your life or your family's history life, or those in your immediate surroundings that you feel like has that same message, okay? Not the same plot line. I'm not talking that, of course, but the same, I mean, unless you have saved yourself by telling a story every night to your new husband, that would be crazy. So, but what is a similar message, okay? So for instance, if I were to take one of these, an example, and you're just writing quick notes because you're not having to tell this story right now. What I hope to do with this is to give you some insight into how the storytelling kind of creative process, and how you could draw the line, and maybe this would begin like a writing experience for you, okay, to make connections to stories that already exist and help you think of stories. When I'm at festivals, I showed you my super cool storytelling notebook here, and whenever I go to a festival, I always have a page that's that reminds me, because whenever I hear a story that's like, oh, that reminds me of when I went to the Lewis and Clark Caverns, and oh, that reminds me, and I just have to write a few words, because that's the beauty of storytelling, is it hopefully like wakes up some stories inside of you that you hadn't even thought about before. And that's what I want this exercise to do. So pick a few stories and then think, okay, what is something that's happened to me, to a loved one, that I've heard my grandma tell me that has that same message? Okay, so for instance, Scheherazade, if I were to tell that story, like, okay, that storytelling can save a life, I would connect that to me and how that first winter in Montana, storytelling, it literally saved my life, because I got this job that I wasn't planning on getting, but thank goodness I did, because if I didn't have to go and be a librarian and tell stories to kids regularly, I would have left Montana. I would have gone to live with my mother, and I would have told my husband, I will be back in June or July or whenever it decides to stop snowing. And so storytelling saved my life, and it saved my marriage, and it saved me to now I love Montana. And I love winters, which is really crazy, but I absolutely do, because I learned to ski, which is another story for another time. All right, so go through, pick 3 or so. And again, these are not ones that you'll have to share. You didn't have to share anything, but if you'd like to, that'd be great. You're not telling the whole story. You're just kind of making notes of what makes sense to you. So I'll stop talking, give you some time, go through.
And Mo, we're at 5:01, and we told people it's a happy hour.
Oh,
5 o'clock.
great.
So there's like
Awesome.
a quick wrap up version of this.
Okay.
Who would like to stay can, but we are at our hour.
No, it's fine. And we can end, you can do this much on your own. So, so I would just encourage you to do that on your own. You guys had such wonderful ideas. Our discussion went long. I'm sorry, I lost track of time. So this is what I would encourage you to do on your own to help connect to stories in a way that you hadn't really thought of before. Because like I had said earlier, storytelling, it's really all about connection. And we connect to ourselves, and we connect to each other. We connect to the past. We learn from the past. We learn, and all of this is through stories that are real, stories that are made up, stories that have been passed down. But it's all about connection. And so hopefully as you do this exercise, first you maybe have carried a little bit more appreciation for stories and storytelling. And then you also can see what connects you to stories that you may already know really well. And what that can do is help you take a story that's maybe hidden inside, that you haven't thought about for a while, and to take it out and look at it. Be like, oh, that's interesting how that happened. And it's sort of like this. And then you can blend them if you like, as a creative process. But thank you so much for coming, for having, Cheryl just asked if I can write up. I can. I can write that up and I can email it out, I guess, and you can pass that along, of that process, because that's how I do a lot. That's something I love in storytelling. But just thanks for coming. Thanks for your cool ideas and your insights, the ideas you gave me about storytelling. And I guess we'll wrap up unless there are any other questions. If anybody has any burning questions about storytelling or anything else, I think then I'm here to answer them, or we can sign off. So whatever you want to do. So
the questions and all that in Facebook, if you want to go to, you'll see this live video and you can watch it later, and you can write comments in there. And if you are in the Zoom meeting here, I have your email from when you registered, and I'll send out the writing prompt from Mo when she sends it to me.
Okay. Great. And also, and I don't know if this is in the event, like I do live storytelling on Facebook and YouTube a couple times a week. And I'm doing, just different things. So if you check out my website, which is moreynolds.com, or you can see me on Facebook, and maybe we can put that information out there as well if you wanted to tune in there. Those are more geared towards littler kids. So if you have K through 6 probably, but I do other stuff on there as well. Some online, I've been doing some online festivals and things like that. So anyway, that's it for me, I guess. Unless you have anybody has any questions or anything.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
You guys are awesome.
For sharing your story with us.
Oh, of course. Thank you. I hope this gets juices going and lots of new stories will get discovered out there.
Welcome to Montana.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You know, we just had our 4-year anniversary. So I love it. I love it.
You're
here
an old
too.
timer then.
That's right.
And I hate to tell you, but the winters used to be a lot worse.
That's what I hear. That's what I hear. It's okay. Winter and I have made peace. Spring and I, we still are, we are not on good terms yet. Because you can't ski. Like once April hits, can't ski. It's too warm. You don't have the fun snow stuff. It's just muddy. And yeah, April and I, we're not quite there yet. We'll get there. So awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for giving me this opportunity, Sam. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.